Thanks for inviting me. It's good to see you, and I think I've seen some of you on an individual CV checking basis today. I'm doing a talk on how to build a great CV for academia and beyond. This may seem like a bit of a challenge to you. The challenge for me is having only half an hour to do this. So I have put my slides on SlideShare, so you can access them from there. So I'm going to do a quick sprint, Usain Bolt-like, through the talk. And you're welcome to ask me questions, and of course, I'll leave some details at the end as well. So let's go. Any answers to this one? Ten seconds? 3 seconds? 5 seconds? Well, you're on the right lines. I would say maybe 20, 30 seconds, but actually, yeah, it could be 5 seconds. Oh, this one's no good. Throw it out. It's a bit like, when you get your emails and you're desperate to get rid of them, because you get so many, and it's all about competition. So it's not so much that, your CV and what you've done and so on isn't appreciated. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be because you haven't written it in a way that has made you stand out from the crowd. So if you imagine all these magazines vying for attention from their audience, different magazines will present themselves in different ways to attract different people, and they'll put strong images and big writing and so on. And then if you like that, then you pick it off the shelf and then you start to read for detail. So you're at that stage when you first land on the employer's desk. At this stage, I've got to get noticed. So how are you going to do that? Well, first of all, you need to think about the employer's perspective. Because what is a CV for? What's its function? Any answers? To introduce yourself? Yeah. Showcase your talent, absolutely. And what will happen if it's successful? You will get a job, but what will happen before that? Interview, yes. 9 times out of 10, it's to get you to an interview, and even more so nowadays because you've got the Skype facility and other facilities. So it's very unlikely now that you will be able to get a job without having an interview first. So let's have a look at the employer's perspective, because unless you can think about what's happening on the other side of the desk, you may not be pitching yourself correctly in your CV. So what do academics want? A lot of you here are PhD students, you're postdocs, maybe you're thinking of staying within academia and looking for a job in academia. What do academics look for? So they're really after research and technical skills. When you look at their job adverts, this is the first thing, and very, very specific skills as well, in a very niche area, maybe a particular model system, a particular area of science. But they also want good problem-solving, analytical, and project management types of skills from you. But they're also looking at outputs, and their outputs are publications. Do you have any first author or other publications? Have you got any experience of applying for funding? Because that's something you have to do in academia. And as you progress to more senior roles, they'll be looking for things like evidence of an international profile, successful collaborations, collegiality, all sorts of other areas of academia that you need to think about if you're aspiring to achieve an academic position ultimately. On the other hand, outside of academia, depending on the employer, obviously, if it's a specialist technical company, they may still be looking for those research skills, those technical skills, but they will also be looking for communication, project management, commercial awareness, team working, leadership, and perhaps even some qualifications. So there may be some gaps there from your own experience. But it may be that your experience from your PhD, from your research, is transferable so that you can present this information on your CV to show your evidence of your suitability for this post But you'll have to write it in a different way because the academic employer is looking for something that is directly relevant, whereas they are looking for the indirectly relevant. So let me illustrate this with 2 examples. Okay, so these are real job adverts that I've seen recently. So don't focus in on the actual discipline itself, but this is very, very typical of a kind of job specification for a postdoctoral position. So they will tell you about the project and the kind of things that they're looking at and the focus of the research. They will always ask for a PhD because that's an essential if you're going to do a postdoc. They want experience of experimental design, conducting large-scale experiments with crops, molecular skills, characterization, analytical skills, statistical analysis. They want someone to be able to coordinate with external partners, and successful time project management is essential. You can understand that because of all the milestones and the deadlines that are associated with funding. And then again, more collaboration because research is much more interdisciplinary these days. So there's a research post, a typical research post. This other one that I picked out, it's a public engagement coordinator. It could be anything, but I've just picked this one to illustrate the difference in the kind of advertising, the kind of requirements that are needed by different employers. So here they are recruiting a public engagement coordinator, and the role is central to developing and implementing our strategy, building capacity, developing partnerships, and creating, organizing innovative and engaging public events. So they want experience in public engagement. They want outstanding communication skills, supporting academics and researchers, creating and organizing events, developing strong working relationships and external partners. So they are very different in their focus. So you can imagine that the 2 CVs that are sent out from these, for these 2 particular positions would need to be quite different. So if you look at the proportion of your PhD associated skills and expertise that are required, then if we look at this sort of very simplistic model here, and you see that the PhD in the middle is where you do your PhD, and then academic research very close to that PhD, where a PhD is essential to getting a position in academic research. Then you move further away into the realms of subject-related careers. So a scientific job where a PhD might be essential or desirable by the employer. And then further where you can't see that so well, but non-subject careers. So something completely different, maybe consultancy, management consultancy, finance, whatever. So the need for transferable skills and general knowledge increases as you go further away from a job that requires a PhD and where a PhD is essential, and a decreasing need for the specific subject knowledge. And that then needs to be reflected in your CV. But let's just have a look at those skills in a little bit more depth, because I find that sometimes people with a PhD, people in science, they don't realize and they don't value their skills. They don't really recognize them. So when you look at your research experience, the obvious gains that you have are things like your specific research knowledge, which is obviously very, very useful in particular jobs and career sectors. You also have gained some fantastic research and technical skills, very high level, that are really appreciated by employers. Teaching, supervising, maybe you've done some of that, maybe you've applied for funding, maybe you have other experiences as well associated with academia. But all these other skills, these transferable skills that you're developing, I've just listed a few of them here, are quite prolific. And I think this is perhaps where people don't appreciate so much the extra skills that you are developing during the course of your research, which employers find really invaluable. So communication skills, management, project managing, self-motivation, resilience, the fact that you can't delegate anything. You're good problem solvers. You've got to work it out for yourselves. You've got to be very resourceful. And so you've gained all these experiences, as well as from other areas such as work experience, people getting involved in voluntary work while they're doing their PhD or postdoc. You might be involved in committees, memberships, training courses, and if there are skill gaps that are associated with you and there's a gap, a sort of deficit there for jobs that you're applying for, then this is an opportunity for you to fill that gap while you're doing your research, if possible, to try to get more skills and experiences. So what you should do, you've got to target your application to the employer. So you've got to show awareness of the job requirements. So usually the employer will list the requirements in order of their importance. So the most important ones they will list first, and then in decreasing importance as they go along. You've got to explain your interest and motivation for the job and the company. So that means that you've got to be writing things in your CV and in your covering letter that show and demonstrate that you're aware of what they want and who they are and their requirements, their priorities. And then finally, you've got to show this evidence, examples. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to be great for your company. So, how do you read a job description? I always say, think of it like an exam. You don't just write down everything you know on the subject. You're strategic because you want to get as many points, as many marks, and get an A grade as possible. So if you map this onto your CV and onto the way in which you read this job description, you want to look through all the specifications very carefully. You want to underline or highlight the key things that they're looking for. Try and work out what's essential and what is desirable. Things that you can match directly, and then things where you might have to do it as a transferable skill. You might have to use the communication that you did as a PhD student and then transfer it into this new career. And then things that you don't have any experience and the skills that I said before where there might be a gap and you might have to think about doing something about that. Just a quick, interesting statistic, and I don't know how meaningful this is. I don't know where it came from, but it gets thrown up every now and again, so I thought I'll just chuck it out there. But men tend to, and this is a generalism, okay, if they meet 60% or less of the criteria, they will go for the job. Well, you know, take a bit of a risk, let's go for it. Whereas in general, women tend to be a little bit more conscientious, looking at all the specifications and making sure that they adhere to all of those. And that goes for promotion as well. Women tend to hold back a little bit. You know, they might think, oh, I'll just wait another year, whereas a man will step forward. So just bear that in mind, ladies. So remember, the essential and desirable criteria for a job is a wish list for the employer. If only they could have that perfect person. Well, if only you could have your perfect job. Nothing is perfect. So, you know, we're going to maneuver, we're going to negotiate a little bit. We won't necessarily get exactly what we want, but we want to get as close as possible. It's unlikely that all the candidates will have all of these essentials. So, you know, nobody's going to come in as the perfect candidate. It's all about you selling yourself as being the perfect person. And if you look, like you can easily develop into that role, you still have a good chance. So it's showing, yes, actually, I did that in my PhD. I did that while I was doing my postdoc. It was in a different context. But because I've been able to do it before, like I've been able to learn and pick up technology very easily, and I'm sure, even though I haven't used this technique before, I will be able to learn it and develop proficiency in it as I have before. So employers want evidence. And evidence is your CV. So you've got to present yourself in the best possible way in your CV. And the way to do this is to think of the formatting. Now, the formatting that I come across the most is chronological. So you start with what you're doing now, and you work back. So I did a postdoc, then I did another postdoc, then I did a PhD, I did some work experience, I did my master's, and it's a backwards, reverse chronological. And there's the targeted. So let's just look at chronological first. It is a good starting point if you want to make a record of all your experiences, because it's very easy to forget things that you've done and dates and so on. It's a great dumping ground for putting everything in. And when you go to a conference and you do something extra, shove it in the CV, have it on your computer, and then you can draw upon that. A lot of academics tend to use a chronological CV because they're established in that one career. So they can do that. They can start with, they're a professor now, and before that they were an associate professor, and before that they were whatever, and so on. And so they might advise you on that kind of CV. But actually a targeted CV, even for academia, is very, very useful. So a targeted CV organises the information according to the job and the experience that's required. So it matches appropriate capabilities and is actually organised in a way that fits with the job specification. So I'll just run through quickly what kind of things you need to include on your CV. So this is the content of your CV. The personal details at the top. You don't need to put your address in anymore. You can put in your contact details, any social media, LinkedIn profile, ResearchGate. So that's your name at the top as the title of the CV. I always put a question mark against career goal. Unless you've got something really good to say, don't bother. And put that kind of information into your covering letter. So it's got to be quite hard-hitting. Your employment and your research history, well, you would call it those kind of titles depending on the kind of job you're going for. If it's a research job, it could be your research history. If it's a job in industry, your employment history. If you're doing a postdoc or you've got some work experience. Otherwise, you might start with your education and your PhD and your master's and your bachelor's. The skills and competencies section is the targeted part of the CV, and I'll show you some examples in a minute. And then a question mark again against publications. If you put all your publications on a non-academic CV, what kind of impression will that give to the employer? They'll think, well, why are they telling me this? This is irrelevant to me. You can tell me that you've got 5 papers from your research because that shows that you've been successful, but I don't need all this information. So again, think about your employer and what they're looking for. And again, all these other academic accolades or achievements, you can still put them into your CV, but just reword them, rename them, and give them a different amount of space according to the requirements of the employer. And again, referees. You can put your references down, especially if you're going for an academic position, 2 or 3 academic referees. But if you're going for a job at an industry or you're putting your CV with a recruitment company, you might want to just say referees available on request. And if you can give 2 perspectives, so you might have your supervisor as one person. If you've worked in industry or you've worked for somebody or done something that is relevant to this position, you might want to ask them to be your referee instead. So the other things you need to consider are the length of your CV. So I would normally say 2 pages, which you can extend with appendices. So if you look at an academic CV, it's very long, but it has a core 2 pages at the beginning, and then all the publications and the funding and the teaching and all the other lists of experiences and achievements go in this appendix. The layout needs to be consistent, and the organisation, the order you put things in, and so on. The other thing you need to think about is using the same language. I've given some examples here, but if you're moving outside of academia and into somebody else's community where they speak a slightly different language to you, and you can take your cue from the information that you might find on their website, or in the job specification, what kind of language are they using, and try to use that. So instead of focusing in on, say, the system that you use, or you worked on Drosophila, do they really mind? Are they interested in that? But you can talk about the technology that you've used. You can talk about being a good project manager, working in teams and cooperating. So, matching with the employer. So going back to the two examples that I gave you, this is the academic position, this is the postdoc research scientist position, highlighting the key requirements of this employer. So you've got to have a PhD and the skills, the tech skills, and then some other extra project management skills, time management. So here's a screenshot of an example of an academic CV. And so you can see that James Phillips has highlighted his PhD. He's writing it to an academic who's very focusing in on education. And so they would want to see a consistent academic record. And then he's talking about his research experience in lots of detail, highlighting some key achievements where he's managed to get some good results. He got a paper. He's also involved in a learned society. He's applying for funding. He's got all his skills and competencies in research, technical, supervision. He's got his awards and achievements and his 2 academic referees. So you can see that's really well positioned and targeted to the academic post. So if you remember the public engagement coordinator, this was a role about developing strategic partnerships. It's about having experience in public engagement. So James, if you look back at his other CV, you can see on this final line here, involved in National Science Week to promote science to the local public. So he did this little bit of science communication, but he didn't want to highlight it too much to the academic because they're a bit worried, oh no, you're going to be out in the lab doing science communication all the time. But here, this is his reworked CV. So this is him adapting his CV to the requirements of the employer. So he's taken his science communication experience and he's walloped it up to a huge part of his CV. And he's really reduced down his reference to any research that he's done because they're not interested in that. They might ask him about it at interview, but that's another day. He's got to get to the interview. So he's got to show them, look, I know what you're looking for is people who have got public engagement experience, who can communicate and support academics. It's not a perfect CV. I don't think there is such a thing, and you could probably still criticize this. But it's a much better CV. It's much more likely to get him to an interview for that job than if he'd used his academic CV. So I'll just give you another example. So this is Clara Goodman, who is a postdoc. She's got expertise in biofilms and wants to change her academic. She wants to move out of academia and into a biofilm company. So this is her academic CV. So again, you can see she's put her ResearchGate, social media contacts. She's put her research experiences, all the different research areas, the projects that she's been doing, her previous research work, her PhD, and then all her technical skills and things that are related to academia. I don't know why she's put her full driving license down, but maybe, she needs to drive to work and so on. And again, languages, not sure that was necessary. But she's then reworked this CV. I'm not giving you the job specification this time, but you can see she's reworked it for industry. Okay, so what she's done is she said what her key capabilities are in that top part, so that the employer doesn't even need to read through her CV. She's got these key experiences and skills that were required by the employer. And then she's got a list of professional skills. which relate back to the job requirement. So they still want someone to show and demonstrate their research experience, but they're really interested in things like teamwork, problem solving, analytical skills, communication. So this is just an example. You could take these different sections from your own CV, and you could create them and label them whatever you want. And just because something's in a communication box for this CV, they could still be evidence of, for example, leadership. They could be evidence of team working. You can make whichever headlines, headings that you want to. Because the CV is a dynamic document. In some respects, it's great because it allows you to organize all your experiences the way you want to, unlike an application form. But on the other hand, it's also a challenge because it's difficult to work out where to put everything. So hopefully this has given you some sort of ideas about how to reorganize and write your CV. And I'll also just have a quick word about covering letters. You should always send a cover letter. So when they say send your CV, they mean send your CV and a covering letter. So you always introduce yourself, introduce the CV, and just highlight the key areas of your CV that will be of interest to them. Why you're applying for the job, why you're applying to them, and then highlighting some key evidence and finishing with a confident conclusion. So here's an example, and as I say, I've got these on SlideShare, and I know this isn't that easy to read, and I'm not expecting you to read for detail. Probably from the back it might be impossible anyway. But she's saying that she's writing to apply for the research associate post, that this is for a postdoctoral position. She's talking about her research and saying why she's applying, and then in her second paragraph, she talks about the deep understanding of biofilm dynamics and a paper that she's written, and how this is then going to be able to feed into the research of the academic, and how she will make a contribution, and then finishing with a confident conclusion. And then for the other job outside of academia, but in industry, applying for a biofilm scientist, she's then talking about how she wants to apply her skills for an industrial challenge with this company and what kind of experiences she's got, but it's less in detail about the actual projects and so on. She doesn't talk about her paper. She talks about successes that she's had in her research. And then she says why she's interested in them. It's a global company developing new products, so she shows a little bit of understanding. You'd have to show a lot more understanding if you got to an interview. You always research the company and know all about them before you step through the door. So she's finished again with a confident conclusion. So this has been a bit of a Usain Bolt rush through the CV talk. I'm just going to give you a couple of, a few pointers here about things that I've left out. So normally I would do this more of a marathon. I would do it as a 3-hour workshop or interactive thing. But in this talk, we've missed out things like the fact that one rule doesn't fit all, okay? So German companies generally would like a photograph. French companies would like one-page CVs. Some countries prefer a chronological CV. They're more traditional. There tends to be in Europe a more sort of standardized way of writing a CV now, but there are still companies that prefer things to be done in different ways. Sometimes you have to complete it online, so make sure you follow the rules for an application. Don't send your CV instead. As Stephen pointed out when he was talking about how he got the job in Novartis, network, network, network. If you can find a contact, if someone can recommend you, then an employer's going to be a lot happier, rather than having a stranger walk through the door that they have then got to assess in an interview. They would rather have a recommendation from somebody else, or for you to have made contact with them in some way beforehand. So, imagine if you were, thinking about employing somebody in your lab or who was going to come and share a house with you. You wouldn't want a complete stranger, or you were asking for a plumber, a recommendation for a plumber. This is the same thing. Never, ever dismiss or discount the power of networking. So that's more like going in the side door rather than the front door. And employers will tell you about 90% of jobs are secured through networking. And when you're writing a speculative letter and a CV, you've got to do it even more. You must write to a particular person who you've already pre-networked with, hopefully, username person, and be very specific. Finally, a summary. Just remember, it's a matching process. Find out about the employer. Think about what you have to offer. And you've got to sell yourself. You've got to market yourself and really get their attention. I would say always target your CV to every single application. So I would say you have to change your CV for every application. Always send a covering letter. And if you're having no results and you're not getting any interviews, you're going wrong somewhere. And when I hear people on the radio or people saying, I'm not getting anywhere, or people saying, should I take my PhD off my CV? I say, you are going wrong somewhere. Let me see that CV, because I'm sure it's to do with the layout, the format, the way that you're presenting yourself. It's not, you yourself. So bear that in mind and try and get somebody to help you. So there you go. We've come to the end. We went a little bit over time, but as I say, I've got the slides on SlideShare. And if you want to contact me, you can link with me on LinkedIn. And there are my details, and that's my website. And I'm wishing you success.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Sarah Blackford. Thank you. We have quite a lot of questions, so please don't jump off just yet. We've got 9 questions somehow.
Oh, gosh.
If you guys have a preference on what question you'd like answered, please feel free to go to slido.com, NJCE18, and vote on particular questions. So let's go from the top, please. Do you need to have referee details in the CV? It looks like you've been so comprehensive that no one feels the questions need answering. Do you need to have referee details in the CV, or would a small note, referees available upon request, suffice?
I think it depends on the employer. Again, I think I said this before, but if you are applying for an academic position, a postdoctoral position, and so on, you're in the same community, so I would definitely put your referees on there. Whereas if you're applying for a job in industry, but they're not necessarily going to know these people particularly, then I would just put available on request.
Thank you very much. This is a great question. How do you avoid repetition between the CV and cover letter?
Repetition is fine, actually. It's reiteration, it's emphasis. So you want to emphasize key things from your CV. So as you will see from my CV, I am currently doing a PhD. Well, that's on your CV. Don't ever assume that people read things properly. So, you don't know if they're going to read your CV first or your covering letter, and reiteration, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to go into great bits of detail, but you must pull out those key aspects.
Thanks very much. How do you avoid repetition between your CV and covering letter? That's a joke. I'm just making a joke. What's the perception of non-standard CV layouts and photos on CVs? So I guess, how original can you be with a CV?
Yeah, I think it depends on the job. I mean, I've seen people putting infographics and all sorts on their CVs nowadays, and I think it's okay up to a point, as long as the person can really easily see the information. If you're going for a creative position, visual representations or, and so on, then you might want to demonstrate that creativity. But I think you've got to kind of keep it conservative as a general rule.
Thanks very much. I'm going to go for that one in the middle. If you have all or most of the desirable traits but lack one or two, do you think you should still apply for a job? Ça dépend.
It depends. It depends. I mean, if it's an essential requirement, I saw one recently. It was a job in Barcelona for a communications officer or manager, and one of the essential requirements was being able to speak Catalonian. Well, you wouldn't be able to get around that, I'm afraid. You wouldn't be able to apply for that position. Whereas somewhere it's essential, you feel that actually I could develop that skill. I could do something about that. Actually, I heard from somebody who said he was going for a clinical trials position, and he kept not getting anywhere with his CV. And then he saw there was a skill gap, and he went and did the course online, and he put it on his CV, and suddenly he started getting lots of interviews. So it does depend.
Thanks very much. Is there a clear benefit to writing a personal statement in your CV? And how effective are specific buzzwords? Team player?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, I just think it is a question mark. Because if you're going to write a personal statement, if you're going to make that personal statement or objective at the top of your CV, it's got to be really good. It's got to be showing that you are the perfect person for this job. I think if you're going to send a covering letter, then that does the trick. If you're somewhere like a career fair and you're walking around and you're maybe handing out your CV, then I think it's worth putting the statement at the top to introduce yourself and what you're doing. But other than that, be very careful about the personal statement. And yeah, it can look a bit formulaic if you just chuck in a load of buzzwords.
Thank you. I'm gonna go off piste here and try to encapsulate all the other questions. So it sounds like a lot of these depend on the individual job that you're applying for. So how do you read a job application so that you know what kind of job you're applying for, what you should leave in, what you shouldn't put, what you should put in, what you shouldn't put in? You know, like what rules are there? How do I work that out?
I think that kind of analogy of writing an essay or writing an exam is quite good, because I think that's what you would do. If you were given an exam or you were given an essay to write, you would think of the key things that you had to get into that essay in order to get your points, to get the best marks. And you would put the most important information early on so that you make sure you pick up those points and don't run out of time. So for a CV, you want to be putting the most important information first on the front page, at the top of all the paragraphs and so on, because people can just skim down. And so, you will get that from the employer, from their job specification. It's purely a matching process, so don't worry about, I must write it in my own words. It's not like that at all. You should use their words, especially if it's going to go through a computer and they've got keywords all plugged in. And if they want a management, if they want management experience, you say that you managed something. If they want a coordinator, then you coordinated things. So it's that specific.
Thank you very much. Normally we'd be out of time, but it's the end of the day, so I'm going to let you answer the last couple of questions, if that's all right. Yeah. If you particularly like a person and you know an employee in a company, should you mention it in the cover letter?
That's a difficult one, isn't it? I think, first of all, that person needs to know that you're going to be mentioning them. I think if you've had a discussion with them, and they've recommended that you apply, so you might have seen somebody today and they said, make the application, then I think you can say, I was at the career conference, I was at the Nature Career Conference, and I spoke to so-and-so who, recommended that I contact you. So name dropping is really a good thing to do, but don't just, throw a name out, left of field, and they definitely need to know and have given their permission for you to do that.
Thanks very much. And last question, would you, I think we've sort of answered that, but would you recommend applying to jobs where you seem to be a perfect fit, where they don't specifically ask for a PhD, but a bachelor's or a master's?
It depends on the job really, because it depends what level it's at, and a lot of jobs are asking for a particular level of experience, and then people with a higher qualification are applying. So if it was, for example, a research group in a company that were asking for a master's or a bachelor's, I wouldn't recommend applying for that, because they're probably, applying, they're employing a particular grade, a particular part, where you might come in as a technician or something. But if it's a job where it's outside of academia and you're new and moving into it, then I don't see that there's a problem at all in you applying for jobs where they're actually asking for a master's or a BSc.
Thank you. Thanks very much. There's one more question. It's had 3 votes. I don't want to shortchange anyone. I have a lot of working experience. And if I put all of it down, I'm going to end up with a 5-page CV. Should I drop some of the earlier jobs? Can I have a go at answering it before you do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, drop the less
Please
relevant
do.
jobs until you get down to 2 pages. Is that a good answer?
Absolutely. Or combine things together. So don't repeat. So if you've had sort of similar work experience, you can put it all together in one job and pull it together.
Thank you very much.